One guy comes to mind, 13 different arrests for multiple felonies, and he kept getting out, kept getting out.
And people are pissed off at you.
Yeah, they're mad at me. And, we're doing everything we can. We're devoting all the resources we can to find this guy, find all the property stealing. And I just felt like the citizens need to know which judge said, it's not a big deal, let's let him out. In fact, the day that this report went live, I got a lot of questions from folks about an individual that was he was given a PR bond for a felony menacing case. Most people understand felony menacing is pointing a deadly weapon at another person. How did he get a PR bond? I don't know, you'd have to ask the judge.
Wouldn't it be nice to know exactly how long guys are in jail, how long they go out of jail? Wouldn't it be nice to know, well, what really happens when somebody is released and how long it takes back? Steve Reams is a sheriff of Weld County. I think people ought to, first of all, nice beard. That's newish, isn't it?
It's newish, yeah. I had a little vacation, so it's my vacation beard.
Really? And the missus?
She loves it.
Really?
That's why I'm still wearing it.
It is always a up or down. It's like, yeah, I had a beard for a week.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the wife likes it, so we'll keep it.
Yeah.
At least for a little bit.
For a little bit. Well, I think you got to keep growing and get that ZZ Top Weld County thing. No. It's Weld County. You're a bunch of hicks anyway. You just really go down
Hicks
low.
in the stick. Sure.
Hicks in the sticks.
We'll take it.
For people who don't know, sheriffs are not sheriff's departments.
Sheriff's offices.
Are offices. Yes. And you guys get awfully touchy about that. And never piss off a guy with a gun anyway. But there really is a difference between a sheriff and a chief of police.
Absolutely.
One responds to the mayor who hired him. He has one boss, or maybe the city manager. He has one boss. And so his job is to please that one boss. How many bosses do you have?
About 340,000 in Weld County.
You're directly elected.
Yeah, absolutely. So I run for a partisan office. I'm a Republican elected sheriff. Weld County is largely Republican, but not all Republican. So I have to make sure that I'm listening to the will of all the voters, because I'm hoping that I get voters from both sides of the aisle.
And you can have a challenge from within your own party. That happens all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I haven't had that luckily since my first term. I haven't been opposed. So it's been a great time in office, but I think a lot of the reasons I haven't been opposed is because I'm listening to what my constituents say and trying to do what's fair by them and stand up for the things that are important to them.
What I love about that is if I don't like how you're doing it, I get a direct say to vote you out.
Absolutely.
There is a real joy in that. And I sometimes think if chiefs of police had that same relationship with their citizens, that, no, I don't answer to the mayor. I don't answer to the city council or the county commissioner. I answer to the guy I just pulled over. It makes a real difference, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And, oftentimes in some of the cities, you'll see where a city council or a mayor will direct a police chief to go a certain direction that, maybe the citizens aren't exactly supportive of, and the weight of that falls on the chief when it's all said and done. They can fire the chief, wipe their hands of it, and go away. I don't have to be beholden to any board. I answer directly to the citizens if they don't like.
How long were you a deputy before you ran for sheriff?
About 17, 18 years.
All in Weld County?
Yes, sir.
Were you raised there, or is that?
No, I grew up in Texas. I moved to Greeley to go to college and chase a high school sweetheart, and I stayed, and I'm not with a high school sweetheart anymore. But yeah, I stayed with the sheriff's office.
Well, since your wife's going to see this, tell me about this sweetheart.
Well, we're still friends. We have a child.
Oh, really?
Together,
How good of a friend your wife wants to know?
Yeah. So my wife and her are friends on Facebook. All's good.
Oh yeah.
We have a good relationship. But a 25-year-old son together, and it's been great. Greeley's been an awesome place. Weld County's been an even better place, and I'm grateful to be there.
Let's talk about crime that is exploding everywhere.
Sure.
Everywhere. And every citizen is dealing with inflation and crime. Yeah. Colorado has never been like this. I grew up in Colorado.
Right.
We've had times of more crime and less crime, but not the kind of crime where people don't want to go downtown anymore, where people walk across the other side of the street, where people are feared for their lives. I've never seen anything like this. And while it's better in Greeley and Weld County, certainly than it is in downtown Denver, I got to imagine it's worse there than it's ever been too.
Sure.
Would I be right?
Yeah, I think that's very accurate. Anywhere you go in Colorado right now, you're seeing an increase in crime, whether that's car theft or drug use or a combination of all those different things. Crime is up in Colorado, and it's sweeping across the state. We're fortunate in Weld County. We still have the support of the majority of the citizens, but we're not unaffected by what's been happening in the state of Colorado. It's difficult.
Help me out. Why? What? I mean, you're in law enforcement. You catch bad guys. That's your job. What's different?
Well, and as unfortunate as it is to say this, since I've been in law enforcement in Weld County and in this state, I would say about 80% of the people in my jail at any given time are there for some kind of drug-related activity. They may not be there on a drug crime, but their crimes are fueled by some kind of drug addiction. That may have resulted in a domestic dispute. It may have resulted in a car theft. It may have resulted in getting caught with drugs, but a lot of the underlying issues are drugs. And as you well know, in this state, we have a very permissive view of drugs and what used to be illegal narcotics, and it just keeps getting worse and worse, and I think those addictions keep growing higher and higher, and we're seeing the effects of that.
Really? So if we could go into the Wayback Machine, and if Amendment 64, I think it was, which was recreational pot, by the way, if it didn't pass then, it was going to pass at some point. But are you telling me that if that didn't pass, Colorado, you think, would be on a completely different path right now, and we wouldn't be seeing what we're seeing? I
think we'd be on a different path. I think you're correct. At some point, it was going to pass. The problem that I see with the medical and recreational marijuana in the state of Colorado is the lack.
It's way too expensive.
Well, I don't know. I don't go in those shops, but it's kind of a bad deal as a sheriff. But the lack of regulation. I mean, there's no testing of the products that are going in that really have any kind of reliable labeling for the folks that are using them. And quite frankly, it's created a bigger cottage industry than ever. And I call it that because you can't say it's an illegal industry anymore, but it's created this black market industry or gray market industry that allows marijuana to be grown right under our noses, but maybe not necessarily sold in the state.
And I know guys who are very proud of their weed gardens, all right? And they are very, very proud of how they've done this and that. And they're allowed to have, 6 plants or something, I forget what it is. And, they take as much pride in that as Aunt Bee took in her tomato plants, and they're working on it. It's great. I don't really see them as a problem, that these are the guys, you have to have time and patience and a job and all the rest. I don't see a one-to-one correlation.
No, you're absolutely correct. Those guys weren't the problem before Amendment 64 was passed. Those guys weren't the focus of
Who are the problem?
The problem is the big, large-scale folks and what they're.
When you say large-scale folks, you mean the conglomerates that are now making.
So,
or are you talking about big pot?
I'm talking about all those things because there is such a lack of regulation. You don't know what's what, and quite honestly, we're dealing with more drug cartel interactions in Weld County, with a direct nexus to drug cartels out of Mexico than I would have ever believed. It's mind-boggling. Yes, absolutely.
Help me understand this, because I'm assuming that you're having an explosion of fentanyl issues more than anything else.
Absolutely.
So do you think that pot begat fentanyl issues?
So think of it this way. Why would someone need to smuggle pot across the southern border if they can just grow it here and then use Colorado as a hub to distribute it where they were going to distribute it to before? Colorado has become a midpoint. So now it's easier just to smuggle in every other drug, fentanyl, meth, cocaine, you name it, it's in our communities. And fentanyl it's a poison, to be honest with you.
There's a wake up going on fentanyl. It is really, especially here in Colorado with the change of law, which I believe was so well intentioned. I don't believe that but it was misdirected.
Well, I don't think any cop wants to go out and catch the average user and try to figure out how to put them in prison forever, and that's not what cops are doing. Quite honestly, we're going after the big level dealers, but in this state, going after a big level dealer it's very difficult.
Why?
It's very difficult. Well, we have this very permissive view of drug use in the state. A lot of stuff has been taken from a felony level down to a misdemeanor, as you well know.
But not for the big guys. I mean,
how do you get to the big guy? The only way you get to the big guy is to catch the street dealer and have some kind of leverage against them. If that leverage is removed, they don't go to jail. If they do go to jail, they're released right away. Then how do you get your tentacles into the big guy? And it almost defeats the process. Drug task forces around the state are struggling to try to figure out how to make cases right now. And they're spending a ton of resources trying to make the same cases that they would have likely made through informants and CIs, 2 or 3 years ago.
CIs being confidential informants?
Yes.
All right. So you've spent a little time on what we call transparency.
Yes, sir.
We want to know what you're doing and how you're doing these things. And it's odd. At the Independence Institute, we do a lot of Open Records Act requests. And it's amazing how different governments in Colorado report things differently.
Right.
Some are very, very cagey with their information. You've just taken a pretty interesting action to, make it so that I don't have to ask you these questions.
Right.
What was the question, and then what is it you've done to answer it? What is it you were trying to solve?
Well, I think to the point we were having just a minute ago, I have a lot of time where I'm out in the community talking with constituents, and they're concerned about the crime that's happening in our community. And they keep asking, why are these guys getting out of jail so quickly? Why aren't they going to prison? Why aren't they being dealt with in the court system? Why are you letting them out of jail? Pointing that question at me.
Yeah, why are you letting them out of jail?
Because they're court ordered to be released. And so when you start telling people that, hey, we can arrest them as many times as we want, but if they're given a personal recognizance bond, I don't have the decision making to say, well, we're going to override what the judge says and just keep them here anyways. I have to let them go. I have to release them from my facility. And with the new changes in state law, I have to release them very quickly. So
really, what law?
There were several laws that were passed over the last few years. I have to release them within 6 hours of their bond being posted.
Wow.
They have to have a bond hearing within 48 hours of being arrested. We were doing that in Weld County all along, but the short of it is this: the scales have been tilted towards the criminal, and unfortunately, you're seeing that in society. So I got tired of being asked the question, why are you letting all these people out? So we started doing a released report to show exactly who was getting out of the jail and what for, what judge they had appeared before, and what kind of bond had been set by that judge.
Oh, time out.
Sure.
This is delicious. All right, so let me see if I got this right. So you have to let guys out of your jail. Not only do you catch bad guys, but the sheriff runs the jail too.
Correct.
And if I understand, you've got a nice jail there, I've heard.
I have a 1,300 bed facility with only about 550 inmates in it.
Really? So if I need a place to crash,
we've got space.
What do they call it? 3 hots and a cot?
Something like that. Yeah. So actually 2 hots, but
All right, 2 hots and a cot. All right. So you catch them, and then you have to release them. And so people like me wonder, well, how many are you releasing? Why are you releasing? How long did you have? So you're just making all this public.
Yeah, for a long time we've had a daily arrest report to show who was being brought in by what arresting agency.
And that's always been public, right?
That's always been public.
In fact, a lot of local newspapers will put out an arrest map.
Absolutely.
And
Right. And a lot of jurisdictions across the state, in fact, most jurisdictions across the state have those arrest reports. The data for a released report is a little different because typically someone has to go to the court, listen to the actual bond hearing in order to obtain that information, but it's all on record. The courts all have that information available, so we just figured it was easier to put it out to the public, let them see. They could look at the daily arrest report, look at the daily released report, and draw their own conclusions.
That is so common sense.
Yeah.
Let me give you a point of comparison. One of our great activists, Natalie Menton out in Lakewood, would do quarter requests for the county and the school district for their checkbook. And then she'd put it online. And they hated this because you'd see things, but you wouldn't quite have the context of it.
Sure.
And then, so sooner or later, I think both the county and the school district decide, well, we want to do it right so that we can explain what these expenses are and put their checkbook online for every constituent to see.
Absolutely.
And so here, all you're doing is saying, hey, here are the guys coming in, here are the guys going out, and why, including the judge's order.
Yes, including the judge who oversaw court that day, what bond they set, and whether it was cash, surety, PR bond, whatever decision they made.
PR being personal
personal recognizance.
So personal recognizance bond was, yeah, you did something bad. You promised to come back for your hearing? Okay, there you go. Isn't that basically what it is?
That's exactly what it is. It's a promise to appear. Sometimes there's a cash value placed with it, so if the person doesn't show up to court, they could be fined, the $1,000 or $5,000. It's rarely enforced, but that's kind of the details.
So let me ask you a couple questions on your observations of this. Do you get a lot of repeat customers that a guy who you were forced to release 6 hours ago in the next day or two is back in there for something else?
Yeah, so the reason we actually did this report, there were a couple of high-profile individuals that we had arrested over the course of a year and a half, especially during COVID. One guy comes to mind, 13 different arrests for multiple felonies, and he kept getting out.
And people are pissed off at you.
Yeah, they're mad at me. And, we're doing everything we can. We're devoting all the resources we can to find this guy, find all the property he's stealing. And I just felt like the citizens need to know which judge said, it's not a big deal, let's let him out. In fact, the day that this report went live, I got a lot of questions from folks about an individual that was he was given a PR bond for a felony menacing case. Most people understand felony menacing is pointing a deadly weapon at another person. How did he get a PR bond? I don't know, you'd have to ask the judge. But we had used our SWAT team to arrest that guy the night before. Those are kind of things that, when you dig a little deeper.
I mean, you had to use a SWAT.
Absolutely.
And you guys don't want to use a SWAT team,
no,
do you?
sir.
I mean, that's not the way you want to bring somebody in.
No.
But you felt you needed the SWAT team, and the guy was out on a personal reconnaissance bond.
The very next morning.
The very next morning.
Yes. I don't even know if we had all of our equipment put away before the guy's walking out the door. And those are the kind of things that I think if the public understood, and quite honestly, I don't know if the judges are getting the information they need. By the way,
the judges must love you now. I mean, you must be getting flowers, and you're going to get a felony menacing case from one of the judges. So let me ask, not to be impolite, have you noticed that there is 1, 2, 3 judges that do this more than the other judges?
You can definitely find trends in the report. I don't know that it's changed behavior yet. The judges they're independent of my office, so they're going to do what they want to do. I have seen a little more cash surety being issued instead of personal recognizance, but only minimally.
Whatever you measure, you improve. I mean, that's just the way it is.
Sure.
And when judges see that people are looking at them, they improve as well.
Well, and I think it's important for your viewers to know that the judges, they're also facing a battle. They've been woefully understaffed for years. I mean, for years we've talked about only about 5% of criminal cases actually go to trial. Probably less than that. Most everything gets dealt with through a plea agreement.
Bargain, right?
Yeah. So, there's some kind of deal making going on behind the scenes. Well, then you compound that with COVID, so you shut down the courts essentially for 2 years, and you let this backlog build and build and build. So the judges now are trying the cases that were the most egregious cases, in the height of COVID or before COVID. They have no idea how they're going to catch up to what's coming in. My whole goal here is to shine light on how broken the system really is. The judges are at fault. They have some issue here too, because they are giving pretty low bonds to people that create a risk to the community.
What about the prosecutors? And for those who don't understand it, and I might not understand it, bad thing happens, call the sheriff's office, you send out a deputy, catches the bad guy, puts him in jail, and then at which point the DA's department has to decide whether or not to charge him.
Absolutely.
At which point they go, Steve, we're not charging this guy. We don't have enough, or it wasn't bad enough, or we just don't want to deal with it. So before you get to the judge, don't you have to deal with that part of it? And are prosecutors are they doing their job trying to keep these guys in jail?
I can't knock the prosecutor's office in Weld County whatsoever. I think they do a great job of taking the cases that make sense and, maybe pleading out the ones that aren't worth the time in court, trying to find some other middle ground to deal with that offender and get them back into the community. But I think the 19th Judicial District, I think they do a great job of triaging cases, but there's only so much you can do when the capacity of the court system is so low. I mean, we have more criminals than we have time in court, and that's to the advantage of the criminals. They know this. They absolutely know the system, and they know
how much is
the
change in laws? We talked first about change in drug laws. Are there changes in laws which require judges to do what they're doing, or do they still have they're empowered to do what they want?
So there was a change in 2019 by the legislature that said any low-level crime, low-level misdemeanors, petty offenses, municipal offenses should be handled with PR bonds. Those are things that were probably going to be handled with PR bonds before.
And they say should have, or do they mandate?
So that's a real gray. It's very gray. I think the way that the judges.
By the way, people who think when they make laws,
they're never that
no,
clear.
it's just Well, how do you what?
Well, as the lawmakers have told me several times, it's constitutional until it's proven not to be.
Yeah.
So the
Delightful,
law
isn't it?
Yeah, it's great. So the law that was passed in 2019, I believe the judicial branch took that as, we're going to give PR bonds to everything that's a low-level misdemeanor that doesn't involve some act of domestic violence, some kind of personal injury to someone else. But there is a whole litany of felonies above that are also receiving PR bonds, and I can't explain that decision.
There's no law saying we prefer you to do PR bonds for those guys.
Absolutely not.
So it's the judges.
So I think there's a different school of thought amongst many of the judges that are on the bench. I don't know where that school of thought comes from. I don't agree with it.
How are they appointed?
They're appointed by the governor.
And how many? And for, let's see,
been a long time.
16 years now, we've had Democratic governors. We only had one respite in between.
Right.
But I will say that before Bill Owens, our last Republican governor, we had Roy Romer, who was not a pussycat when it came to crime.
Sure.
And Dick Lamb before that. And, we had John Love and others. The last few governors have put in these judges that are not doing the job.
You get what you pay for, you get what you vote for, and people ask, why is it so important to have a conservative governor? I mean, it's important for a lot of reasons, but judges' appointments are very paramount on that.
Yeah, I mean, if you like the crime, keep the judge. You want to keep the judge, keep the governor. You want new judges, get a different governor.
Absolutely. And, I believe we have some good judges on the bench in Weld County, and I also believe that we have some that probably could be replaced. I
also believe we have I don't want to say broken system. We have what's known as a retention system. So the governor puts a guy in there, and then the voters of Weld County, depending on the level, 4 to 6 to 10 years for Supreme Court, get to answer this question: shall Judge weak in the knees be retained for another 4 years?
Right.
Overwhelmingly, they are passed by about 70 to 30%. So the vote is, oh yeah, because we don't know who these guys are. The Blue Book says they recommend, go get it. The lawyers that come up in front of them make up do the review committees. The review committees say, oh yeah, we should keep them, because what lawyer is going to say, no, the guy I'm going to go in front of, we should get rid of. And then they're retained and they're retained and they're retained. I see really only two viable policy options. Let me run both by you.
Sure.
One is elected sheriffs, and elected judges. And a lot of states have elected judges. That scares me for lots of reasons. That then you've got judges who have to run for election. They got to they got to raise money, and it's just the conflict of interest start growing. But the retention system, when they always get 65% plus vote yes, it seems to me that the reform needs to be, you need to get 60% and above, or 50%. You need a supermajority so that we actually start getting some turnover, and things like your transparency project actually give voters some information about those judges.
Well, I would agree with saying they need a higher percentage to be retained in office. I also think that there could be mandates as to what they have to publish to the citizens. I shouldn't be the one putting out this information about bond hearings. The court should be the one putting out that information about bond hearings. If they want the citizens to know what they're doing on the bench, then put it out there. You can find all kinds of information about what's going on in the courts, but very rarely will you find something that you could relate back to judge performance. And I think bond hearings are one of those things that you can use to judge a judge by.
It is hard to judge a judge.
Absolutely.
And the reason is, if you're judging a legislator, you can look at his voting record. He voted for this, he didn't vote for that. He said this, he didn't say that.
Right.
And it's very kind of black and white. Did the bill pass, did the bill not pass?
Right.
With judges, they deal with a huge, gray, mucky, oatmeal-y thing of stuff, from divorce cases to civil cases to this stuff. But it is a fascinating thought that they should make these things publicly accessible via easily to get website.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, so the blowback I've gotten from the judges is that, hey, this information is already available. If he wants to put it out there, that's fine. Other than
so was the checkbook at Jefferson
Absolutely.
County and
But no one
Jefferson
was doing
schools, but it took somebody to push them to do it, to get it out.
Well, and for the person who lives, in the far reaches of my county, driving up to the Weld County courthouse to listen to individual bond hearings of a particular person just doesn't make sense.
Is this costing your office a lot of money to do this?
It's not costing us a dime.
How is it not costing you? You said the guy had to listen to these hearings.
So we don't have to have anybody sit there and listen to them that's not already assigned to the courts. We have deputies in court every day. They're taking those same notes. All we're doing is
taking those notes and adding them
taking
up.
those notes and putting it out on the computer
Are you worried that you
system.
might have errors in it?
Of course, but those errors are, we're humans, so we're going to make errors. If we make an error, we'll correct it. We'll publish that we made the error like we have in any other mistake that's gone on, and we'll put the information out to correct it.
I'm so grateful you're doing this, and I hope other sheriffs follow. Have you gotten any other sheriffs that are calling you up going, Steve, how'd you do this? How'd you do this?
Yeah, I don't want to out them, but yeah.
Out them.
Well, okay, Logan County, they were the first ones to call and say, hey, can we get a copy of the report you're doing so we can kind of match it? There are a few others that have at least expressed some interest, and quite honestly, there's some legislators that are going to be in session in January, that want to run a bill that requires this information to be put out.
That would be so awesome. Have you had any of your compatriots go, what the hell are you doing? This makes me look bad. I don't want you to do this.
I haven't
don't
done that, but I'm sure at the next sheriff's conference I'll get hit up on both sides of the equation. But I'm not one to hide from controversy, good and bad, and we're going to do what's right by the citizens, and the report's going to stay.
Let me switch gears for you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I knew you weren't prepared to talk about this, but now that we used to have a gun preemption law in Colorado, and which meant that the state took care of gun laws. That way you didn't have to worry that if you crossed the street, you become a criminal.
Correct.
Our libertarian governor decided that we're not going to do that. We're going to let localities have local control. Not that they could lower the amount of gun. So it didn't seem like you could say, wait a second, we're going to allow 30-round magazines again in Greeley or Weld County, or maybe you could. No one's done it yet. But you can increase it. So we're seeing progressive anti-gun places like my hometown go crazy, saying you can't conceal carry here, you can't own this type of gun, you can't own that type of magazine. Now, in the city, police will decide whether or not to enforce that. In Weld County, you got a lot of space there, and there'll be lots of, a lot of people, if they start doing those laws. Will you enforce those laws?
Well, so I don't see the Weld County commissioners creating any kind of law that restricts gun rights any further than what's already on the books. And no, I wouldn't enforce it. Quite frankly,
if they did, hypothetically, if they pass what Boulder County looks like they're going to pass, and the city of Boulder certainly did, and so did Louisville and Superior. Well,
I think it goes back to the whole thing that laws are considered constitutional until they're proven otherwise. I don't think what's happening in this state is constitutional. I don't believe that follows our Second Amendment, and quite frankly, I'm not going to enforce a law that I think is unconstitutional. I had the same argument over red flag. I think red flag is ripe to be challenged and overturned, and I think these...
think about it. So I know this guy, he's a little off his nut, and he's got a bunch of guns, and I'm very worried he could go postal. So I call up the tip line and go, do something about that.
Sure.
I'm just trying to save another shooting. What is wrong? What could possibly be wrong with that?
Well, again, take away an object, it doesn't make that person less dangerous. I think, honestly, those red flag laws are very inhumane because you're not dealing with the person who's in crisis. You're dealing with an object that person may or may not own. And you're doing it at the risk of not the Second Amendment. That's a point of concern, but it's more the Fourth Amendment. It's this person's right to privacy and the way in which the red flag law
in
works.
Due process.
Right, absolutely. You're turning that upside down. So, in my opinion, the law is ripe to be overturned. It's just going to take the right set of circumstances to take it forward. In Weld County, we've been fortunate enough that, knock on wood, I haven't had a red flag order issued to my agency, but we have a plan in place of how we'll deal with that. And
so just play this out for me. And the reason you're concerned, and I'm concerned about red flag laws, is that they're open to corruption. 100%. And that before you take away anybody's stuff, particularly stuff that he is constitutionally guaranteed to have,
absolutely,
you got to go through due process.
Right.
And you're not, Fourth Amendment, you can't take people's stuff without due process.
Right.
But in this case, we're going to say, no due process for you. We'll take away your guns, and then we'll do due process.
Right.
And I could see that being abused in a different circumstance.
Sure.
And we all think about, when we make laws, we always think about how we are today. We don't think about how we're going to be in 100 years.
Right.
Or would you like that law if Donald Trump was the mayor of your town? Is that the law you would like?
Sure.
And so I'm very concerned, and I was surprised to see that the ACLU and other groups that used to care about civil liberties were AWOL when it came to due process for gun owners.
Well, so that's the interesting part, is the ACLU didn't take that stance in some other states where red flag was passed. I brought this up in testimony at the state capitol. I believe it was the state of Delaware, where the ACLU weighed in on behalf of gun owners. That wasn't to the liking of the folks that were sitting in committee, but regardless, I think the state of Colorado is going to be a test bed for how far you can go with what I deem to be unconstitutional gun laws. And there are going to be some folks that challenge it. I think the stuff you're seeing at the local level on gun restrictions, where you can carry, what you can carry, how you can carry it, it's unenforceable. It's unenforceable. It's very shallow thinking, and at the end of the day, I don't think those laws will be successful at their intended purpose. If there's an intended purpose.
No, I disagree.
Okay.
And the intended purpose is to create a bizarre patchwork of laws around the state that it's almost impossible for a sane person to keep ahead of. Wait a second, I moved to this house and now I have to give up my guns? Right. No, I moved to that house and now I can't carry over here. And about 9% of Coloradan adults have a concealed carry permit. And now in the most vulnerable places where we've had shootings, I look at what Boulder's doing. We've had shootings in theaters, specifically. We've had shootings in houses of worship. Specifically, you can't carry there. In grocery stores, and you can't carry there. And at some point, somebody's going to go, what the hell? We can't, where we are most vulnerable, you anti-gunners are saying you can't do it. And these are people with concealed carry permits have big background checks. Mm-hmm. They have to be trained on gun safety.
Absolutely.
Talk to me a little bit about the concealed carry that you guys do. You have to give people a concealed carry permit if they meet certain criteria. How many people in Weld County have a concealed carry permit?
About 25,000, give or take, the day of the week. I mean, we have turnover that happens. That number's gone up dramatically since I took office. I think when I took office, there were 11,000 permits.
25,000 out of a
population of 340,000. So, there's a considerable amount of people out walking around with a concealed weapon. What's interesting in Weld County is there's a lot that open carry. That's still a pretty common thing to see.
Does it freak out that people are open carrying?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't bother me because I know it's there.
What do you mean you know it's there?
Right.
He could go nuts and it's right there, and some people feel uncomfortable about that.
Well, if a carpenter's carrying a hammer around on his belt and he goes to lunch, I don't worry about that hammer any more than I worry about someone's sidearm. I know it's there. They're not hiding it. Obviously, their intent is not to intimidate anybody with it.
How about the guy who's walking around with an AR slung on his back?
Well, that obviously creates a different concern, and I think normally when someone's doing that, it's for attention. We've interacted with that a few times, but quite honestly, the Colorado law permits it.
And by the way, I think the guys who do that, please don't do that. You're scaring the normies.
Well, you're hurting gun rights in your state when you do that, and that's the conversation we typically
So out
have.
of these 25,000 people that you have given concealed carry, and you have to, they make these requirements by state law, you must give them. How many of those guys have committed crimes?
Very few. The ones that typically, if we have to revoke a permit, it's because a guy got sideways on a DUI or something like that. Not that the gun was involved in the situation, but they had a violation of the law somewhere else, and we'll pull that permit back until
there's a restraining order
Sure.
against them. The ex-wife has a restraining order, and so
even those are very rare.
Really?
I mean, it's a very rare circumstance.
How many of those 25,000 people with concealed carry permits in Weld County have used a gun in a commission of a crime?
I can't think of one.
Not one.
Not one since I've been in office.
Not one since you've been in office, or been sheriff?
Since I've been sheriff, but I can't remember one since I've been with the Weld County Sheriff's Office. I may have missed one.
And that's the point that's so bizarre, is that in that theater, boy, if there was one of those guys there, boy, if there was somebody in the grocery store.
Well, how about a shopping mall in Indiana?
A shopping mall in Indiana, or the streets of Arvada in Old Town.
Yeah, now that obviously had a tragic ending, but
he saved lives.
He did save lives, yes. Yeah.
Thank you for making what is publicly available easily available.
Correct.
I hope it starts a wave.
Me too. I think the citizens of Colorado need to know what's happening.
If you want to learn more about this or see the list, where do they go?
So they can go to my website, weldsheriff.com. It's right on our main page.
Weldsheriff.com.
Click on the released report, and each day will show up. You can search by name. You can search by a day out of the year. It has a very easy search tool, and you can explore all you want.
Can you search by judge?
We don't have that set up, but you can.
Can you search by bad guy?
You can search by bad guy.
Really?
Absolutely.
Oh, that would be fun.
You can do that on the arrest report too. So if you have a question about someone who's applying for a job down here, you can always go see if they did something.
So arrested you, so you can see them enter the hotel and leave the hotel.
Absolutely, you can. Yes.
Steve, thanks so much.
It's my pleasure.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.